Okay, here we are. I'm going to show you how to UV map this 6-pack case using the UV edit panel in the new 2023 Cinema 4D. Now honestly, it's gotten a lot easier over the years, and I want to show you a process that's going to help you with not just box-sized packaging UVs, but really any kind of 3D model that you want to lay flat onto a UV map. So first thing I want to show you is a trick that will help you if you have more complex models before you start the UV mapping process. I'm in polygon selection mode right now, and I can select faces that I know I'm going to be putting complex images, or that I want to have shown prominently, so I can place images on a model. So I can select these faces and actually store a polygon selection to be used for later when I'm laying the UVs out. So I can make this selection, and then I go into select drop down and do store selection. You can see right here a tag shows up, a polygon selection tag, which I can also name if I want. But what I'm going to do is I know that these parts of the case are going to be really where all the images are going to be, the parts that I want to save and show prominently. So I'm going to save them as polygon selections. I select this right here, same thing, store selection, tag shows up. I'll do this one right here, and going all the way around, as well as I want to get this part too, all of these faces and these right here. Store selection, same on this side. There we go. Okay, great. Now I've got all the parts that I want to show prominently saved as polygon selections. I can also go back to this tag and double click, and I can just reselect those polygons by doing that. Okay, great. So now we can go into UV edit. Let's go into UV edit panel right here at the top. If I click that, you can see I have the viewport on the right, and then right here will be the UV editor, the UV map that we're going to be creating. Here's a bunch of commands specifically for UV editing, and you can set this one first, set UVW from projection. Now if I click that, this happens, and that's not bad, and I'll show you what happened there. If I just hit undo, go back to the beginning. Okay, so what I did was I clicked this button and it unwrapped in this way. Now if I hit undo, I'm going to go back and show you. If I hit this settings button right here, I can then go into different projections to lay this model flat onto a UV map. Now just to show you, if I selected cylindrical, hit OK, not helpful. But if you have a cylindrical object, it might be helpful. So you can have different projections right here to kind of get you started on creating this UV map. Spherical, also not helpful, but anyway, you get the idea. So, and I can also, without having to undo, I can just hit this settings button again and check different projections without kind of being married to them. So I can do this again, cubic 2. This actually is not bad. And I'll just show you too, I selected box earlier, and that was where this projection came from. And that's kind of like if you were going to take an actual 6-pack cardboard case apart and lay it flat, it kind of looks like this anyway. So this is a good place to start. Now some of the drawbacks of this are, if I select these faces right here, now the nice part is I can select the faces in the UV editor, and I can see which ones they are in the actual 3D model, and vice versa. So if I select these or I select these, I can see which ones they are in the UV editor, and that's really nice to have that back and forth ability. But what's not nice about this projection is if I select this area right here, I can see how there's actually 3 different polygon faces layered on top of each other right here, and you can kind of tell that's the case because this is a little bit of a more saturated yellow than this. It kind of gives the idea that these are layered. This is not good. Every face needs to be laid flat by itself without laying on top of any other faces. And again, just a quick note about navigation. I can use the right click to zoom in. I can use the middle mouse button to move around. I just can't rotate the view with the left mouse button like I could in the viewport. So I can zoom in and out and move around this view in the same way that I could with the 3D viewport. Okay, so first problem is right here. Now really all you want to do with this button is just kind of get the UVs or get the polygon faces laid flat into the UV editor. Now, just real quick, from a vocabulary perspective, UVs are these laid flat polygon faces, and these are polygon faces. So when I say UV right here, when I'm saying moving UVs around, I'm actually saying I'm moving these polygon faces around. What makes them different right here is that these are two-dimensional. There's no third dimension on this UV map. When I say UVs, I'm really kind of saying like the 2D representation of this polygon face on this model. Now UV, real quick, is not an acronym. It doesn't mean anything. It's just another set of coordinates like X and Y. And so when it says UVW, it's really saying like XYZ, but because they're different coordinates than XYZ, they use different letters. So that's really all it is. UVW is another set of coordinates like XYZ. So UV, which is why you're only really seeing UV editor, is because it's two-dimensional. There's only two dimensions, U and V. So just so you know what that stands for. Okay, so getting back to this, what I'm really looking for is just to get started having these UVs laid out on this map. Because regardless of what you end up doing with these commands, there's always going to have to be some kind of customization created. So I want to show you that process so you're not kind of beholden to whatever the projection is that Cinema 4D tries to do. You need to be able to know how to lay out custom UVs for whatever model that you have. And this is a good starting point. So now the cool part is, I can use the selection tool right here to select these UVs and then see the corresponding polygons in the viewport. Now I can see right here, these 6 are the actual, the inside bottom of the case, which really won't be seen at all. So this doesn't need to have prominence in the UV map. No one's going to see it. And also these little edge polygons right here are also part of this pack of 6 UVs. And that's fine. These are all kind of low prominence, right? They don't need to be shown or have a lot of detail for the model. So what I'm going to do is just show you the process of kind of selecting these polygons and these UVs and arranging them by scale and rotation and position onto this grid right here. Now what I can do just in this process of laying out custom UVs is I can use the move, scale, and rotate tools, and the shortcuts are ERT just like they are in the viewport, to move these UVs around. So I have this selection. I'm going to hit E, and you can see that. I can move this around. Now there's a little bit of like tiny little polygons that are left behind. So what I'm going to do is actually, if I zoom in, you can see where they are. I'm actually going to use the rectangle selection tool to just draw a rectangle around these, so I know I get all of them. Hit E for the move tool and just move them out here for now to get some more space. I'll do these. Now I can see they're layered. This is not good. So this is where the polygon selection tags can be helpful. I can go in and double click and find these polygons right here, and I can just go into this side and use the move tool and move them out of the way. Now these are going to be prominent, so I want to keep these over here. I'm going to bring them back later once I have all of this laid out the way that I want to. Now I'm just going to go through and select the prominent polygon/UVs that I want to separate out first, and then I'm going to go through and organize the rest of the UVs that I'm going to be laying out. So the next section right here, I'm going to select with the brush selection tool. Select these. I'm going to bring these out like that. Now again, I can use the selection tags if I want, but luckily this is a pretty simple model, so I can just do that as well. Select these, move them out, and then select these. Now for this part, for this section right here, I'm going to use the polygon selection tags. So I'm going to go in here, double click that, highlight these, and here they are right here. So I'll drag these out as well, and then this one. So now I have all the UVs right here that I'm going to be showing prominently, and the rest right here are the smaller parts of the case that I don't really need to you know, give a lot of space to, but I want to include it in the UV map, obviously. So if I just do over here and use the rectangle selection tool and highlight these, I can see where all of these are. Now I'm going to want to separate out these faces just so they're not overlapping, but otherwise I can just lay them out in here, not overlapping, and then I can bring these more prominent sides back in and give them more space on the UV map. So I'm just going to go through the process right now and speed it up and show you how I'm just going to select these and separate them and then lay them out. Okay, now they've all been separated out, and I've scaled down the parts that don't need to be shown as prominently. And now I'm just going to place these prominent UVs into the map so that I can give them more space and lay it out so that I can provide images onto the UVs for texturing. And there we go. We now have the UVs laid out, and they're packed in a way that give prominence to the parts that are going to have, you know, the most detail for the texture. And now the next part is to create this UV map as an actual texture, and then make a file that we can then use inside Photoshop or image editing program. I'm going to focus on creating the texture inside Cinema 4D in a similar way that you would use Photoshop, but this way you don't have to rely on external programs to create this texture and import images onto it. The first step from here is to save this as a texture, because technically right now it's just a UV map, and it's not a file yet that we can then use to create layers and import images and everything onto it. Okay, so the first step is I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to go to the File drop down right here in Texture UV Editor and do New Texture. Now it's going to give me the dimensions in pixels that I want to do, and the color mode and everything. And I can also name it right here as well. So I'm going to name this 6-pack case underscore text for texture. 4000 by 4000 pixels is great. That's a good size. And once I hit OK, you'll see this color change. And there we go. So now you see how this has turned to a light gray, and the color gray on this model is also changed. That means that there's actually a layer now, an image, or a color really, at the bottom layer of this now texture file. There's a lonely island up here, and I'm just gonna highlight this and drag it back down onto the UV map. So now everything is contained inside this UV map. Now what I want to do from here is just a nice it's a nice thing to do once this has been created and you're locking yourself into this, to the way this is laid out. Now what I want to do right here is go to the layer drop down, and right here create UV mesh layer. Now what that does is, it's hard to see, but it actually creates an outline, creates a layer of outlines of each UV/polygon face as a reference for the image editing program. Now I'm just going to show you what this looks like inside Photoshop first, but I'm going to use the layer manager inside Cinema 4D to lay this texture out, so you don't have to use a separate program. But if you are using Photoshop, I'll just show you what that process is really quick. So the next step, now that we have this texture created, is to actually save it. So right now it's not really a file, it's still just inside of Cinema 4D, but I want to make this a separate file, an actual texture file. So the next thing I do is go to File drop down and do Save Texture. Now here it asks me what kind of file format I want to create. Now I like to create PSD files for the layers and all the other functionality that Photoshop provides. So I'm going to do that. I hit OK, but this is where you would just point to where you want to save the actual file. And now here it is. So I'm going to go into Photoshop real quick and just show you what that looks like if you were going to use Photoshop. Okay, so here it is in Photoshop. Now you can see the UV mesh layer is just a nice outline of the UVs that were laid out on the UV map. This is a good reference for creating textures, importing images, and just resizing and knowing where the UVs are on this map. Now I can just turn this off and hide it, and technically do this as well. So I can now use this as a reference, and I can create all those other images that I want for this 3D model inside Photoshop like this. But I want to do it inside Cinema 4D in case you don't have access to Photoshop. So I'm going to close this. Now the way to do this in Cinema 4D is there's not a lot of functionality, but there's a lot of power in doing this, and also obviously it doesn't make you have to use a separate program. Now the first thing I want to do is go into the window drop down, and I'm inside UV edit right here, but it'll be here no matter what layout you use. I just want to show you right inside here in layer manager. This is actually kind of a mini Photoshop. So I can see the layers that are on this texture file inside Cinema 4D, and I could also dock this if I wanted. So I'm going to do it. I'm actually going to drag this and just dock it to the side right here. So now we have a layer manager for this texture, and we can start to actually import images and lay this out inside Cinema 4D without having to go into Photoshop. So now that I have the layers panel docked, I also have to add another panel to control and import images and also do some painting. So I'm going to go down to Window, and I want to use Color Settings in the window drop down, and that's right above Layer Manager. So Color Settings. Now this allows you to do painting. This is where you can choose colors and actually paint things onto this UV map. So I'm going to dock this as well right below Layer Manager. So I've got the layers and the colors right inside here. So I can, by default it's set to solid color, so I could actually choose a color right here or set one, using RGB values, and start painting. What I want to do instead is add a layer and then import an image that I can then edit the size and transform it onto parts of this UV map. So I'm going to save this real quick, and I'm going to add a layer right here. So I can just go to Functions, New Layer, right there. So when I have this layer selected, I go into the Colors panel right here. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to zoom this out as well. Okay, so instead of doing solid color, I'm going to actually select Texture Paint. Now, this doesn't have anything set up right now, but they have this drop-down arrow right here. If I select that, I can load a texture or an image from disk like this. So if I select that, it gives me the dialog box to load an image. So I'm going to go in and select my image. Okay, so I have this paint. It's a paint bucket tool, and now that I have this texture loaded, I select the paint bucket on the UV map, and it tiled the image over across the texture. Now, as you can see, that's not what I want, but if I hit Save Texture on this drop down right now, you're going to end up seeing it on this box. Okay, so I need to actually create a material to put on this 3D model and then apply that texture to it. So I'm just going to open the material editor, double click the empty space, and create a blank material and drag it onto the 6-pack case. And then I'm going to go into the material itself and load the texture file into the texture dialog in the color channel. Okay, there it is. Now it's obviously not what we want, but we can now see the images mapped onto the 3D model. Now if I hit render, you can see it's pretty sharp, so that's nice. Now if we go back to UV edit, unfortunately I've got to reconnect. I've got to add the layer manager and color settings again. Now okay, this is going to happen sometimes, and I don't want you to get confused. There's no layers anymore. That's because we have to select the texture again inside the viewer. So if we go into right here, this arrow, texture selection, textures. Right now it's into empty canvas for some reason. I'm not really sure, but I can just go back into the texture that's saved, and there we go. So in case it ever happens, just go into the arrow right here in textures and select this again. So here we go. Layer, it's tiled. That's not what we want, but we can fix that. But I just want to show you that process. So I'm actually going to right click this layer and delete it and start over again. So I want to do, if I can just go to functions, new layer. Now that I have this texture paint file loaded, I could just click the paint bucket icon again and it would do the same thing, but I want to uncheck tiling first. And there we go. So once I click this, the paint bucket, it's going to load just one instance of that image. And there we go. So now we can move this around to be placed on the model. And you can see where it is right now. It's over, some aspect of the internal parts of the 6-pack case. So what I want to do then is move this image and place it on right here, the main side panel of this 6-pack case. So as long as I have this layer selected, I can go to this arrow right here, and if I go into paint, I have transform bitmap and also move layer. So I'm going to select move layer first, and I can just drag this to the part of the UV map that I want. Now I want to make it bigger, and you can see right now it's actually shown up inside Cinema 4D. This is great. Okay, so now we have it there. Now if I move it around, you'll see how it moves. That's awesome. Now I want to make it bigger. So I'm going to go into this arrow right here, paint, transform bitmap, and you can see that you have those the bounding box like you would normally see in Photoshop or Illustrator. Now I can just do a free transform, or I can hold down Shift to keep the proportions, and I'm just going to scale it up like that. And there we go. It's on the side of the 3D model. And I'm just going to go in here just to keep this stuff. Oh, yes, I also want to hit Enter to transform the layer. There it is set up. I'm going to go into here and just rename this side panel. So I could technically keep this same layer and copy this image and move it over here and to keep it on the same layer. I could do that if I wanted. I'm just going to right click and duplicate the layer actually. So now this workflow is very similar to what you would do in Photoshop, but you don't have to worry about going outside of Cinema 4D to do that. So now I've got this layer selected that's duplicated, and I can go back into Paint, Move Layer, and move it over to the other panel. And if I go over here, I can see that it's all set up. It shows up on the other side of the box. Now, right now I'm going to save this texture and save the project. So I've saved the project. I can go into File. I'm going to save the texture and give it a second. And there we go. So now I'm actually creating the image texture inside Cinema 4D with layers and everything without having to go outside of the program. So next thing I want to do is I want to hide the UV mesh layer. You can see how it goes away. I want to make a general, just a background layer, solid color, so it's not this gray. Now I'm going to just go into here in the background, and I'm just going to go into the colors thing, the colors panel right here, and I'm going to choose a yellow type color. And I can use the color picker, and I can also use an eyedropper and select this kind of yellowish background just to give it some difference. I'm going to drag it to be a little bit lighter, maybe like that. There we go. So now I want to just use a paint bucket tool to apply this color on this layer. And I just go into the paint menu and go find the paint bucket tool, which is right here. Fill bitmap or fill layer. I'm going to use the fill layer command right here. Bam. There we go. Now that is set. Okay, so now I've got a solid color layer that I can put underneath everything. But say I want to create a mask and have different parts of this UV map be different colors. Now, the way that this works in Cinema 4D, there's a lot of steps involved, but it's really helpful to know, and I want to show you. So what I'm going to do first is create a new layer right here. Now, say I want these side panels right here to be a different color from the rest of the 6-back case. So what I'm going to do right now is take the rectangle selection tool and highlight these polygons, or these UVs on this side. Okay, so I've got this highlighted right here. So I want to make a mask for this layer right here. So first of all, I'm going to go to the rectangle selection tool and highlight these UVs, actually, like select them like this. And I go to texture selection drop down right here and create mask from selection is the command right here. Now I click that, nothing really happened on this layer yet, but the selection's been made. So what I do from there is right click this layer and then do add layer mask. And now you can see this actually is a mask of these UV selections. So now if I go to this layer, have a solid color that I've selected, and I go back into the paint drop down and then fill layer with that color, there we go. The mask of that layer has given me the ability to create separate colors, solid colors, or images. It's a layer mask based on the selection of these UVs. Now I'll do it one more time just to explain again, because it's kind of honestly kind of a convoluted process. So say I want these UVs right here, this part of the model, to have a different color, or at least to have its own layer mask for whatever I want to do. I can just select these UVs like that. I have them selected. Texture selection. Create mask from selection. Now I add a new layer, so this layer can have its own mask, and then I right click and add the layer mask. And now this part of the layer has this mask. Now what I can also do, similar to Photoshop, is instead of doing a layer, I can do a layer set. It's like a folder, basically, a group. And I can just drag this mask onto the layer set. So inside here, I can drag this layer. I might just expand this folder or layer set. Now this layer set has a mask on it, and inside of that layer set, I can do anything. I can add images or colors and have this mask handle it all. And that's really nice. That's a very Photoshop-like function that is very powerful and keeps everything inside Cinema 4D. So now I can, just to show you again, I have this layer, I have this mask on this layer set right here. Now I'm just going to call this handle panels, so I know what it's called. go inside layer, texture paint, and I've got these, I still have the Steam, the Anchor Steam logo loaded in. So I'm just going to go into the paint menu and select fill bitmap. Now I don't see anything, and you can see if you look really closely on this layer, it's still, the image is still up in the top left corner of this layer. Now I can turn off the mask by doing that, and you can see the image is shown up. So now I just need to go into the paint, or move the layer, or transform bitmap, but I can move layer as well, and move it into this section. Now I'm just going to put it right here on purpose, so when I turn the mask back on to show you, it's cut off. So this is really nice. This is really, really nice, because I don't have to create, custom masks for these layers. I can just select the UVs and create the mask that way. So as you can see, if I bring this up, you can see it's all inside this section of the handle. And I can also, if I wanted to, add a new layer like this, and change the color of this as well. Solid color, I'm going to change this to be just, I don't know, a blue, whatever. I have this color selected, this layer selected that's inside of this layer set. I go to the paint menu, fill layer. Boom. There we go. Now the UV mesh layer is still turned on. That's why you can see these lines right here. So I'm going to hide the UV mesh layer. And now we have a nice layered texture file that is edited and created entirely inside Cinema 4D and gives you a lot of power and functionality without having to leave the program. It's a mess right now, but I'm showing you the technical part of this process so you can create your own UV map and texture it inside Cinema 4D. Now, I hope this is really helpful. Please like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.